I begged my parents to help me save my son's life. They said they couldn't cancel their European cruise. So I watched them sail away and I swore I'd never need them again. 3 years later, when they came begging for my help, I gave them exactly what they deserved. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about rebirth, about what happens when love becomes conditional and strength is born from heartbreak. If you've ever been the black sheep, the one who gave everything only to be forgotten, hit like, subscribe, and stay until the end. Because this time, the quiet daughter writes her own ending. My name is Elena Marlowe, and if you'd told me 3 years ago that my parents would turn their backs on their dying grandson, I'd have called you cruel. But I learned the hard way that cruelty wears a tuxedo and smiles for cameras. The night it happened, the rain came down in sheets. I remember the smell of wet asphalt, the cold ache in my hands as I gripped the steering wheel, racing from the hospital to my parents' house on the hill. Their Georgian mansion glowed like a palace, chandeliers blazing, cars lining the driveway, laughter spilling from the grand entry. It was Lucas's engagement party, my golden boy brother, the heir to their real estate empire. The one who could do no wrong. I burst through the door, soaked and shaking, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. Mom spotted me first, elegant as ever. Navy gown, diamond earrings, that tight, brittle smile she wore when she was embarrassed. "Elena, not tonight," she hissed, her hand gripping my arm. "Lucas's engagement dinner is not the time for drama." "Mom," I choked out. "Please, it's Aiden. He collapsed at school. The doctors say his heart's failing. He needs emergency surgery within 48 hours. Gad appeared beside her, frowning. You have insurance, don't you?" "I lost my coverage when my firm downsized. I've tried everything. Payment plans, loans. Nothing's enough. I just need help covering the upfront cost." Their eyes met, a silent conversation passing between them. One I'd been excluded from my entire life. Gad finally spoke. "How much?" 60,000. Mom's lips parted not with shock, but calculation. "Elena," she said softly. "We're already stretched thin. We promised to cover Lucas and Emily's wedding in Tuscany." I stared at her. "You're paying for a destination wedding while your grandson is dying?" She flinched at my tone, glancing around nervously as if the walls had ears. "Elena, lower your voice. You're making a scene." That's when Lucas stepped in, champagne in hand, arrogance in his grin. "Always the martyr, huh? Maybe if you hadn't quit the firm, you wouldn't be begging right now." My nails dug into my palms. "I quit because you took credit for my designs and got me blacklisted." He laughed. "Business is business, sis. Learn to play the game." Something inside me broke. The desperation that brought me here curdled into a cold, steady rage. I unhooked the diamond pendant Mom had given me on my wedding day, the one she said symbolized family. I pressed it into her palm. "Here," I said. "You can sell this to pay for the wedding." Then I turned, walked out into the rain, and promised myself I'd never ask them for anything again. At the hospital, Aiden lay small and pale beneath the fluorescent lights, his tiny hand clutching my sleeve, even in sleep. Mark, my husband, held my shoulders. "We'll figure it out," he whispered. "We sold everything, our car, our jewelry, even Mark's restored Harley he'd spent years building. Still short by 22,000. I made call after call. No one said yes. Until one morning, there was a knock at the door. It was Mark's parents, Helen and Ray. They stood there in worn jackets, eyes red, hands trembling. "We heard," Ray said quietly. "We sold the farm equipment. It's not much, but..." He handed me an envelope. Inside, $24,000. I cried until I couldn't breathe. That money saved Aiden's life, not my parents', not my brother's, not the people who bragged about charity galas and helping the less fortunate. No, it was two old farmers who had nothing but love to give. And as I sat in that hospital waiting room, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor that meant my son would live, I made myself another promise. I would never be powerless again. They chose a wedding over a child's life, and someday they'd learn what that choice cost them. Grief changes you. It strips you bare, tears away everything that was soft, and leaves behind something sharper, something that remembers. After Aiden's surgery, the doctor said his recovery would be long but hopeful. I promised him that from now on, things would be different. I'd make sure no one could ever hold our lives in their hands again. And I meant it. We moved into a small apartment over a bookstore downtown. It was nothing like the marble floors and chandeliers I grew up with, but it was ours. There was laughter in those walls, real laughter, not the brittle kind that hides resentment. Mark worked nights at a logistics firm, and I started freelancing again. At first, it was small projects, flyers, small brand packaging, but I poured every ounce of pain, exhaustion, and defiance into my designs. By the time Aiden was strong enough to go back to school, my work had started getting noticed. Big brands were calling. Agencies wanted contracts. And the irony? Half of them had been clients my father's company had once lost because of budgeting issues. Life, it seemed, had a sense of humor. Then, one afternoon, I got a message. Unknown number, but I knew the tone instantly. Clipped, controlling, unmistakable. Elena, it's your mother. We'd like to see Aiden. It's been over a year. Family deserves second chances. I stared at the screen for a long time. Family. The word hit like acid. I didn't reply. 2 days later, another message arrived. This one from my brother Lucas. Look, Mom feels terrible. Dad too. They're trying to make amends. We've got a business opportunity you might actually want to hear about. And there it was. Not sorry. Not we love you. Just another transaction. A month later, a glossy envelope arrived, gold embossed, heavy. It was an invitation. The Marlowe Foundation Annual Charity Gala, celebrating 25 years of generosity. The irony almost made me laugh. Generosity, from the people who couldn't spare a dime for their grandson's heart. But then, tucked inside, was a note in my mother's handwriting. Elena, I heard about your success. I'm proud of you. Let's put the past behind us. We'd love to see you at the gala. My hand tightened around the paper until it crumpled. They weren't reaching out because they cared. They were reaching out because my name was starting to mean something again, and they couldn't stand not being part of it. For days, I wrestled with it. Mark saw right through me. You're thinking about going, he said one night, eyes fixed on me over dinner. I sighed. Not to forgive. To remind them. He frowned. You don't owe them anything. I know, I said softly. But sometimes you have to stand in front of the people who buried you, just so they see you breathing. So I went. Not in designer silk, not in borrowed diamonds, but in a sleek black jumpsuit, my hair loose, my confidence sharper than any accessory in that room. When I entered, the crowd murmured. A few people turned, whispering my name. After all, I was the one who'd fallen from grace, the one who'd cut ties with the Marlowes. And yet, there I was, unbothered, radiant, alive. Mom spotted me first. Her expression faltered, the perfect hostess mask slipping for half a second before she glided over. Elena, she breathed, kissing the air beside my cheek. You came. Of course, I said calmly. You invited me. Dad joined her, for a smile in place. Good to see you, sweetheart. You look successful. I smiled. I am. Their discomfort was delicious. The rest of the night was a parade of insincerity, empty compliments, fake laughter, the same brittle elegance that had once suffocated me. But I stayed calm, composed. I didn't need to raise my voice. My presence alone was the confrontation. Still, as I moved through the crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was brewing beneath the surface. And then I heard it, whispers near the champagne table. Two investors' men who'd once worked with my father. "Have you seen the Marlowe reports lately?" one murmured. "They're drowning in debt. Lucas has been covering payments with offshore accounts." The other man frowned. "Does the board know?" "Not yet, but they will." My heart stopped for a moment, and then it hit me, the pattern, the timing, the tone of my brother's recent messages. They weren't reaching out to reconnect. They were reaching out because they needed something. And my name, my growing reputation, might just be their last life raft. That realization lit a cold fire in my chest. For the rest of the evening, I watched carefully how my father avoided certain guests, how my mother's smile never reached her eyes, how Lucas downed drink after drink, trying to look important. It was all unraveling. The empire they'd sacrificed their family for was cracking from the inside, and for the first time, I didn't feel pain. I felt opportunity. That night, back in my apartment, I stayed awake staring at the city lights, my mind whirring. Mark came out of the bedroom, sleepy-eyed. "You're still up?" "Just thinking," I said. He leaned against the doorway. "About them?" I nodded. "They're in trouble. Financially." And I turned to face him. "And maybe it's time they learn what real consequences feel like." He hesitated. "You're not talking about revenge, are you?" I smiled faintly. "No. I'm talking about justice, the kind that looks like karma wearing heels." The next morning, I made some calls, quiet ones. People I'd met through work, clients who'd once been burned by my father's shady deals. It didn't take long before I had a clear picture. Lucas had embezzled funds from their newest development project to pay off personal debts. My father had signed fraudulent contracts to keep investors blind. And my mother? She'd funneled charity money from their own foundation to cover private expenses. It wasn't just greed anymore. It was a ticking time bomb, and I knew exactly how to light the fuse. They thought I'd disappeared into obscurity, but I'd been building something far more dangerous than revenge, a reputation strong enough to destroy them with the truth. Powerful people never expect to fall, especially not at the hands of the quiet ones they discarded. And my parents? They built their entire empire on the illusion that they were untouchable. It was time to remind them that illusions crumble faster than love. Over the next few weeks, I watched from the sidelines as their carefully curated life began to unravel. It started small, a leaked email here, an investor rumor there, but every thread I pulled exposed another lie. I wasn't hacking or stealing. I was simply revealing. Everything they'd buried for years was already out there. They just counted on people not connecting the dot. I met with Grace Weller, a financial journalist who'd once been blacklisted by my father after she exposed one of his competitors. She remembered me instantly. "Didn't you work for him years ago?" she asked, stirring her coffee. I nodded, until he fired me for refusing to forge financial reports. She arched a brow. "You have proof?" I slid a folder across the table, neatly organized spreadsheets, internal memos, and contracts that had once passed through my hands. "I don't need credit," I said. "Just accuracy." Her lips curved into a slow smile. "Accuracy, I can do." Within 2 weeks, the Financial Ledger published the story. The Marlowe Group, charity front, or fraud factory. It hit like a thunderclap. The article detailed falsified donations, money funneled into personal accounts, and the use of shell companies tied to Lucas's debts. And because I'd timed it perfectly one day before their annual shareholder meeting, the fallout was instant. Stocks plummeted, investors withdrew. By sundown, half the board demanded an emergency audit. That night, my phone buzzed nonstop. Unlisted numbers, unknown calls, and then finally the one I'd been waiting for, Mom. I let it ring twice before answering. "Elena," she said, her voice trembling. "What have you done?" "Nothing," I replied evenly. "I told the truth." "You've destroyed us," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what this means? The foundation, the company, they're all built on lies," I finished for her. It was bound to collapse eventually. I just stopped holding it up. There was silence on the other end, the kind that comes when someone realizes the person they underestimated has finally stopped playing by their rules. Then she whispered, almost pleading, "You're our daughter." I said softly, "Until you chose profit over your grandson's life." And then I hung up. The next day, the world turned on them. Their faces were everywhere. Headlines, news anchors, business blogs dissecting every scandalous detail. The Marlowes, once the pride of the city, were now its cautionary tale. The empire that had stolen my peace was now crumbling under the weight of its own deceit. But I wasn't done. Not yet, because my revenge wasn't just about their fall. It was about my rise and reclaiming everything they'd tried to take from me. I knew Lucas would come to me first. He always did when things went wrong. He showed up at my office one afternoon, looking nothing like the smug heir he once was, his tie loose, his eyes bloodshot. "Elena, please," he said, voice cracking. "You have to help us. Dad's being investigated for tax fraud. Mom's panicking. You're the only one who can fix this." "Fix?" I repeated quietly. "You mean save you?" He nodded quickly. "You're good with investors. If you could just help us stabilize things." I leaned forward. "You remember the night I came to you when Aiden was dying? You told me business was business." He swallowed. "That was different." "No," I said, standing. "It was exactly the same. You just don't like being on the losing end." His jaw tightened. "You're enjoying this." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Lucas, I'm surviving this." Then I opened the door and motioned for him to leave. He hesitated, then whispered, "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll sleep." After that day, I didn't hear from any of them again for months. The investigations deepened. Their accounts were frozen. The foundation was shut down pending audits. I stayed silent, not gloating, not explaining, just living. The money I'd earned from my design firm had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. I started hiring other single parents, paying them fairly, giving them benefits. The company I built on pain became a place of healing. And while my family's name sank deeper into scandal, mine rose from the ashes they left behind. Then, almost a year later, I got a letter from my father. "Elena, we've lost everything. The house is gone. Your mother's health is declining. We have nowhere else to turn. Please, if you have any compassion left, help us." God. I read it 3 times. My hands didn't tremble. My heart didn't race. All I felt was peace. I walked to my desk, pulled out a pen, and wrote my reply. "Dad, compassion isn't currency. You taught me that." I folded the letter, sealed it, and mailed it back without a return address. They thought I wanted revenge, but all I ever wanted was freedom. And the sweetest part of freedom is watching your enemies choke on the silence you leave behind. Revenge stories always end with the villain begging, the hero walking away, and a symphony swelling under the closing credits. But real life doesn't cue the music. It just goes quiet. That's what freedom sounds like. It had been a year and a half since the story broke. The Marlowe name, once gilded across billboards, charity galas, and real estate projects, had become a synonym for greed and fraud. Their empire was gone, their legacy tainted. And me, I was thriving. My design agency had gone international. We specialized in ethical branding, rebuilding the kind of businesses my parents destroyed. Irony had a wicked sense of humor, and I was fine with that. Aiden was healthy now, running, laughing, starting middle school. He didn't remember much about the hospital, but he remembered one thing vividly. "Mom," he said one morning as he packed his backpack, "you always keep promises." That hit deeper than he knew, because I'd kept the biggest one. I never went back. But fate always circles back to unfinished business, and mine arrived on a gray November afternoon in the form of a phone call from an unknown number. "Elena Marlowe?" the voice asked. I hesitated. "Speaking. This is Mercy General Hospital. Your father was admitted this morning. He listed you as his emergency contact." My chest tightened. Why me? The nurse hesitated. "You were the only number he had written down." I sat in my car for almost an hour outside the hospital, engine off, rain tapping on the windshield. Part of me wanted to drive away, to protect the peace I'd worked so hard for. But another part, the one that had once begged outside their mansion doors, whispered, "Go." So I did. He looked small. The man who once towered over boardrooms, silencing people with a single word, now sat in a thin hospital gown, his hands trembling around a paper cup. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Elena," he rasped. "Dad." He tried to smile, but it broke halfway. "You came." I almost didn't. He nodded slowly. "I wouldn't have blamed you." For a long moment, there was only the hum of the machines. Then, quietly, he said, "We lost everything. I know." "I was wrong," he said, voice cracking. "About you, about Aiden, about what mattered." Tears stung my eyes, not because I felt sorry for him, but because I could finally see the truth. The proud, powerful man who'd built his world on control was now just human. "I don't hate you," I said softly. He looked up, eyes glistening. "Then you forgive me?" I took a deep breath. "I do, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting." He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. And for the first time in my life, he didn't argue. He didn't justify. He just listened. That was all the closure I needed. I stayed 10 more minutes, long enough to make sure he had someone to talk to. Long enough to let go of the weight I'd carried since that rainy night at his mansion. Then I left. Outside, the sky had cleared. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger when I said goodbye. I felt peace. A month later, I got a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a handwritten note, short, shaky. "Thank you for coming. You were the only one who did, Dad." No demands, no guilt, no lies. Just honesty. It was the first and last honest thing he ever sent me. He passed away 3 weeks later. I didn't go to the funeral. But I sent flowers, white lilies, and a card that read, "Rest now. I already did." Mom tried to reach out after that, of course. String of voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. "Family should stay together, Elena. Your father would have wanted that. You'll regret isolating yourself." But she never realized I wasn't isolating myself. I was finally free. I didn't delete her messages. I just stopped listening. Because silence was no longer empty. It was sacred. As the years passed, my life became full of color again. My agency grew, Aiden flourished, and peace stopped feeling foreign. Sometimes, at night, I'd look at the city skyline and think about how different everything turned out. If you'd told me back then that my revenge would end without screaming, lawsuits, or confrontation, I wouldn't have believed you. But that's the thing about true revenge. It's not about seeing them suffer. It's about watching yourself heal. A few months ago, I was asked to give a keynote at a women's leadership conference. I talked about rebuilding after betrayal, about finding power in vulnerability, and how survival doesn't have to make you cold, it can make you clear. At the end, a young woman approached me, tears in her eyes. "I walked away from my toxic parents last year," she said. Everyone told me I'd regret it, but hearing you, I know I made the right choice. I hugged her, smiling through my own tears. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do, I said, is stop bleeding for people who keep cutting you. Now, when I think of my parents, there's no anger, no bitterness, just distance, the good kind, the kind that protects, not punishes. They taught me what love isn't, and because of that, I finally learned what love truly is. Not control, not obligation, but freedom. People say revenge is sweet, but peace, real, quiet, earned peace, tastes better. I didn't burn their empire down with rage. I let it collapse under the weight of their own greed. And when the dust settled, I didn't gloat. I simply walked away. Because sometimes walking away isn't surrender. It's the loudest victory of all. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who should have loved you most, remember this: you don't need to destroy them to win. You just need to outgrow them. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories where karma whispers and peace answers louder than revenge ever could.